When did you realize your parents were completely delusional? I realized it the moment I collapsed face first into a bowl of 100-year-old sourdough starter, while my father continued his phone call with a collector about why our Austrian monastery starter was worth $30,000 and didn't even pause when he heard me hit the floor. The kitchen timer on my phone had been screaming for the 2 o'clock feeding when my chemistry teacher grabbed my wrist in the hallway earlier that day. "Violet, you look terrible and you're shaking like crazy," she said while studying my face with genuine concern. "I'm fine, just need to get home because the starters need their feeding or they'll develop the wrong bacteria ratio and become worthless." She didn't let go of my wrist and actually tightened her grip when I tried to pull away. "When's the last time you ate actual food instead of testing bread samples?" I tried to remember, but my brain felt like it was swimming through molasses and everything seemed foggy. My dad needs me to test each starter's output to make sure they're maintaining their distinct characteristics, so probably yesterday or maybe Tuesday. But honestly, the days blur together now. "Violet, it's Friday afternoon and you're telling me you haven't eaten a real meal since Tuesday?" The hallway started tilting sideways, but I pulled away because the French starter needed its specialized flour mixture by 2:15, or it would start developing the wrong kind of acids and lose its value. "I have to go because these starters are worth more than your car, and some of them have been alive longer than any person in this building, including you." My dad was in Tokyo meeting collectors while my mom attended a fermentation conference in Iceland, leaving me to manage 43 different starters in our converted basement that looked more like a laboratory than part of a house. The Australian starter ate every 4 hours and only accepted $80 per pound Queensland wheat that had to be ground fresh, while the Ethiopian one required teff flour and 60% humidity, or it would literally die within 12 hours. The San Francisco starter needed exactly 87-degree water at a precise ratio every 6 hours, or it would lose its famous tang that made it worth $20,000 per tablespoon to the right buyer. By the time I got home from school, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely measure flour, and the kitchen scale kept swimming in and out of focus because I hadn't slept more than 3 hours straight since my parents started their international sourdough empire. The smell of fermentation had permanently soaked into my clothes and hair, to the point where other kids called me yeast beast, and teachers opened windows when I walked into classrooms. But my parents said this was character building. At 4 o'clock Saturday morning, while I was mixing the 100th batch of flour and water that week and trying to remember if I'd already fed the Bulgarian starter or if that alarm was for the Icelandic one, my body finally gave out. Everything went black and I crashed forward into the Austrian starter my father was describing to buyers on his Tokyo phone call, ruining a culture that supposedly traced back to medieval monks who used it for communion bread. I woke up in the hospital with tubes in my arm while a doctor explained to my parents over speakerphone that I had severe dehydration, malnutrition, and exhaustion that usually only appeared in medical residents working 100-hour weeks or soldiers in combat zones. But she needs to feed the starters every 4 hours or they'll die and we'll lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in future sales to collectors who are depending on us, my father said through the phone without even asking how I was feeling. The doctor stared at the phone like she was trying to process what she'd just heard from a parent whose child was hooked up to an IV drip. "Your 15-year-old daughter nearly went into kidney failure because she hasn't had proper sleep or nutrition in weeks, and you're worried about bacteria?" She's being dramatic. Teenagers don't understand the value of building generational wealth through careful cultivation of irreplaceable bacterial cultures that will fund her entire college education if she just shows some discipline. The social worker who arrived the next morning didn't find my parents' business model amusing when they explained how they left me in charge of $500,000 worth of bacteria while they traveled the world for weeks at a time. My mother tried to explain it was teaching me valuable entrepreneurial skills, but stopped talking when the social worker asked her to name even one starter or explain a single feeding schedule without looking at her phone. The social worker turned to me while I panicked about the starters dying without their exact feeding times and special flours that only I knew how to properly mix. "What would happen if you lived with your aunt for just 1 month to recover?" she asked while my father frantically calculated losses on his phone. "The entire collection would die because nobody else knows the feeding schedules and my parents would lose everything they've invested," I said while watching my father's face turn white. The social worker made the decision that either my parents stayed home to care for their bacterial cultures or I'd move in with my aunt immediately. And when they chose their trip to New Zealand over their daughter, 31 starters died within a week while I slept 12 hours straight for the first time in 6 months.